In the heart of deep space, aboard a starship bound for the colonies, a sound erupted so fierce it rattled steel and silenced every voice. Yet it wasn't the engines or a failing hull. It was the cry of a dragon in agony, a cry no one could bear, until a single boy stepped forward, with nothing but calm words and a willingness to listen. What happened next would change the future of space travel forever. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Now, let's jump into the story. The freight deck of the great starliner Wayfarer Dawn shook as if the ship itself were groaning. A terrible sound cut through the air, high and piercing, deep and grinding, all at the same time. It was not the thrum of the engines, nor the crack of a hull breach. It was a living cry, a cry so sharp it rattled bolts and made passengers cover their ears. Above the deck, in the glass gallery, travelers leaned over the railing. Their eyes were fixed on the scene below, like spectators at an unwanted show. Many whispered. Some shouted complaints. Their journey had been interrupted for nearly an hour, and patience was gone. The noise had started without warning and had not stopped. In the center of the deck stood Marith. He was tall, scaled, and winged, a draconid refugee who had been granted space on board. His body trembled. Emerald plates of armor-like skin glinting under the cold cargo lights. His tail lashed against the floor, claws scraping sparks from reinforced steel. It was clear he was in pain, not rage. Yet to human eyes and ears, pain and threat could look frighteningly the same. Captain Lydia Kamar stood on the platform above, her blue uniform crisp, her posture stiff as a steel bar. Her voice carried across the chaos. "Marlowe, if your companion cannot be contained, this ship will turn back to Mars dock." There was no room for argument in her words. Down below, Jules Marlowe froze. He was a mechanic, hardened by years in engine rooms and space docks, his hands calloused, his face lined with grit. Now his hands shook. One pressed against the invisible barrier that separated him from his friend. The other clutching a translator unit that sputtered with static. "It's not defiance," he muttered. "The shift between ports. The way these fields and signals hit him, they tear into him differently." But the crowd above did not care about explanations. A man in a neat executive coat shouted, "If the creature cannot travel, it should not be here at all." Murmurs of agreement spread quickly. Tourists with heavy luggage and business leaders on their way to colonies all nodded as if that settled it. Marith roared again, but it was not a roar of power. It was broken, ragged, and desperate. His wings pressed tight against his body, as if he were trying to shrink away from the storm of invisible forces battering him. His secondary eyelids flickered, a clear sign his balance was faltering. He stumbled against a cargo container, shaking loose crates of hydroponic gear. The noise deepened, echoing like thunder through a cavern. Cargo Chief Orda Nash stepped forward, voice hard. "Restricted deck. Keep clear. Follow protocols." His eyes searched the floor, as if he expected the situation to break into violence. But from the service lift came the sound of smaller footsteps. Soft, steady, not hurried. A boy in a faded orange jumpsuit walked out onto the deck. He was maybe 11, slim, with dark hair and boots made of canvas and rubber instead of polished maglocks. He looked ordinary, but the calm in his stride was anything but ordinary. "Kid, stop right there," Orta barked. "This is no place for you." The boy did not stop. He looked up at the captain, then at the barrier, and then at Merith. His eyes were steady, older than his years. "I know what this is," he said quietly, yet the words carried across the space like a clear bell. Jules stared at him, almost in disbelief. "You've seen a draconid in distress before?" The boy shook his head. "Not a draconid, but I've seen someone trapped inside their own senses while everyone else just stares. I've seen someone drown in noise no one else can hear." The freight deck fell quiet. Even Merith seemed to pause, his cry thinning for a moment, as though he heard something in the boy's tone. Captain Kamar's hand hovered over the control on her belt. "We have strict procedures for this situation," she said firmly. The boy looked up at her, not rude, simply steady. "Your procedures are making it worse." He pointed at the shimmering barrier. "That field hums at 27 kilohertz. You can't hear it. He can. It's like nails being hammered into his skull every second." Jules snapped up his scanner and read the display. 27.3, he whispered. His chest tightened. The boy was right. Captain Kamar hesitated, her eyes narrowing. Then she nodded at Orta. "Drop the field." The shimmer faded. The invisible barrier dissolved. The air shifted, as if a pressure had lifted. Merith sagged, the shrillness of his cries dulling, though his chest still rose and fell too fast. The boy stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "Don't touch him yet." Jules warned. "I won't," the boy said. He stopped a pace away and spoke gently. "Hey, it's too loud, isn't it? The ship is singing 100 songs at once, and they're crashing into you. You're not weak. It's the noise that's wrong." A deep rumble rolled from Merith's chest. It wasn't anger. It was closer to a question. The boy turned back to the chief. "What's the gravity here?" "Standard Earth," Orta replied. "Drop it to Mars standard, 38%, and change the air fans." The rhythm is jarring him. "We cannot," the executive above started. But the captain raised a hand. "Do it." The adjustments were subtle. Passengers barely noticed. But Merith did. His tail eased against the floor. His shoulders relaxed by a fraction. The wildness in his eyes dimmed. The boy exhaled slowly. "Better," he whispered. Then he lifted his hand, hovering it just above Merith's scales. "Your hearts beat a little faster than the engine's base pulse. That difference bounces inside you like an echo. Let us fix the echo." Jules' scanner confirmed the boy's words. Every measure was correct. A hush spread across the gallery. People leaned forward, no longer out of anger, but out of wonder. Merith lowered his head, golden eyes focusing on the boy. The translator flickered once, then caught 2 words. "You understand." The boy smiled faintly. "I'm trying to." And for the first time since the terrible cry began, the freight deck felt steady again. Point. As if listening was enough to open the way to silence, the noise on the freight deck had softened. but the tension in the air remained, like a storm waiting for its next strike. Marith, the draconid, no longer thrashed wildly. His breathing was uneven, his scales shifting from dull green to a faint shimmer. The passengers above leaned forward from the gallery, not shouting anymore, but holding their breath. Everyone was waiting to see what the small boy would do next. Nico stood calm at Marith's side, his hand hovering just above the dragon's scaled arm. He did not touch yet. Instead, he breathed in slow rhythm, his chest rising and falling like a metronome. "You are hearing too many sounds," he said softly, not only to Marith, but also to the entire deck. "The ship is filled with voices you cannot escape. The hum of the engines, the electric pulse of the barrier, the rush of the fans. All of them crash together in your head." Cargo Chief Orta frowned. ... "What difference can a child make here? We need proper protocol." "Protocol is blind," Nico answered without raising his voice. "Protocol assumes every mind works like ours, but his mind is different. It translates the world in a different way." Jules Marlowe's scanner beeped. He looked at the readings, then back at the boy. "He's right. The data proves it. The frequency patterns match his description exactly." The passengers who had once demanded silence now whispered among themselves. Doubt was shifting into curiosity. Nico stepped closer to Marith. "Your hearts beat at 412 hertz, he whispered. "But the reactor throbs at 400. The small difference between them is echoing through your body like a drum that never stops. No wonder you are hurting." Marith rumbled low, a sound that trembled through the floor plates. It was not rage, it was recognition. "Bram," Nico called back to his uncle, who was still by the environmental controls. "Shift the airflow fans. Change the rhythm to pattern 3. Soften the pulse." Bram's rough fingers moved across the controls with the ease of a lifelong mechanic. A moment later, the cargo bay sighed with a gentler breath. The harsh beat of the fans changed to a smoother flow. Marith lifted his head slightly. His wings loosened, and his chest rose in a steadier rhythm. Jules's eyes widened as he studied the readings. "It's working," he whispered. Captain Lydia Kamar stood silent, her arms crossed, watching with sharp focus. She had seen officers, engineers, and doctors handle crises before, but never a boy with nothing more than instinct and patience. "Humans are not the only ones who struggle," Nico continued, his voice carrying clearly across the freight deck. "But we hide our struggles in plain sight. We wear suits for space. We breathe borrowed air. We call those things normal. When someone else needs different help, we call it weakness. But it's all the same. It's all survival." The passengers murmured again. Some looked away in shame. Others stared with dawning understanding. From the gallery, a woman in a silver uniform scoffed. "So we're supposed to take lessons in xenobiology from a child in a patched jumpsuit?" Nico ignored the remark. He did not raise his eyes from Marith. "Listen," he whispered, as if the deck itself should quiet down. "You are not broken. You are drowning in sounds that were not made for you, but we can change them." He placed his palm gently on Marith's scaled arm. For a moment, the draconid flinched. Then his muscles relaxed, as if the boy's calm had spilled into him. The translator flickered, then caught a phrase. Small one understands. Jules's breath caught. 3 years he had spent studying Meredith's reactions, charting scans, gathering data, and yet this child had cut through all of it with plain words. Captain Kamar finally spoke. "Continue," she ordered, her tone soft but firm. "Nico, Uncle Bram, shift gravity in this bay, not full standard, drop it to Mars level." 38%, Bram confirmed. His fingers tapped the sequence. The weight in the room seemed to lift slightly, just enough for the human crew to feel a small change in their boots. For Meredith, the change was everything. His heavy tail eased against the floor. His body swayed, not in panic, but in balance. His wings spread slightly, finding a rhythm against the artificial pull. "Better," Nico whispered. The passengers gasped. The difference was visible. The dragon, who had nearly torn the deck apart, was now moving with slow control, his cries reduced to deep, thoughtful rumbles. Dorian Pike, the executive who had complained earlier, stepped forward. His voice dripped with disbelief. "This cannot be permanent. You cannot remodel a ship every time some creature struggles. Efficiency demands uniformity." Nico finally looked up at him, calm as ever. "Efficiency for whom? Humans already bend the universe to fit themselves. We change gravity, air, light, and temperature to make us safe. Why is it only a problem when others ask for the same?" The gallery grew quiet. The boy's words hit harder than the noise ever had. Meredith lowered his great head until his golden eyes locked on Nico's face. Another sound rolled from deep inside his chest. The translator worked hard before giving a single word. "Seen." Nico's expression softened. "Yes," he said, "I see you." In that moment, the freight deck felt transformed. The passengers no longer stared in fear. They leaned forward, not as judges, but as witnesses to something rare. Jules stepped closer to the boy. His voice cracked with quiet honesty. "I thought I was helping him fit into our world, but I see now you're helping us fit into his." Nico did not answer. He simply kept his hand on Meredith's scales, breathing in slow rhythm. Listening not only to the patterns of machines, but to the living pattern of a mind that had always been drowned out. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with meaning. For the first time on the Wayfarer Dawn, the sound that mattered was not the roar of engines or the cry of fear. It was the steady rhythm of two beings, one human, one draconid, finally in sync. And as the ship sailed forward, the freight deck learned what it meant to truly listen. The Wayfarer Dawn moved deeper into space, and something had shifted inside its steel walls. The great starship no longer felt like a place of fear. Instead, there was a sense of cautious hope. The boy named Nico had shown the crew and passengers that listening, not force, could calm Meredith the Draconid. Now, a larger challenge waited. If one being could not survive under standard conditions, how many others were silently suffering? Nico stood in the freight deck beside his Uncle Bram, a weathered mechanic with grease on his hands and patience in his eyes. "It isn't only him," Nico said softly. Others on board hide their pain. They stay quiet because the ship is built for human comfort alone. Jules Marlowe, the senior mechanic, shifted uneasily. He had spent years adjusting engines and repairing systems, but he had never thought about how the same systems pressed against different kinds of passengers. "You really think there are more?" he asked. Nico nodded. "I know there are." Captain Lydia Kamar listened carefully. Her voice was still firm, but something had softened in her tone. "What would you suggest?" "Small changes," Nico replied. "Not costly, just thoughtful. We can redesign the voyage so everyone can travel without misery." And so, under the captain's cautious approval, the work began. The first visit was to a small chamber where two SETI passengers stayed behind closed doors. Their species needed constant moisture, but the ship's dry recycled air left them weak. Nico studied the pipes along the wall and pointed. "Here, we can loop water from the greenhouse into their quarters. A mist, not a flood." Bram pulled a length of hose, his strong hands steady. In minutes, the air turned soft and damp. The SETI emerged, their gills opening wide in relief. One of them raised a hand in silent thanks. Next came the Ember Weavers. Their bodies needed heat, but the ship's climate was fixed for human comfort. Nico stood by a heating conduit. "Redirect flow here. Create a pocket of warmth." Jules hesitated. "That would make the corridor uneven." "For us," Nico said, "but for them, it will be life." The adjustment was made. Soon the Ember Weavers leaned into the heat, their eyes glowing softly. Their joy was not loud, but it was unmistakable. After that, Nico visited the Shimmerfolk. They had barely been seen outside their quarters, because the bright overhead lights hurt their skin. Nico studied the panels, then sleut amber sleeves over the bulbs. The glow became warm and gentle. For the first time, Shimmerfolk stepped into the hall, their skin patterns glowing like liquid silver. Passengers who once feared them now stood still, quietly amazed. As these changes spread, the Wayfarer Dawn itself seemed to breathe easier. The corridors no longer carried whispers of complaint. Instead, they carried sounds of relief and small laughter. Through it all, Marith stayed close to Nico. The Draconid no longer trembled in distress. His voice grew clearer as the translator caught his words. "Little one," he said one evening, "you listen where others speak." Jules watched with quiet awe. "I thought I was helping him," he admitted to Bram. "But I see now I was asking him to become more human. Nico is teaching us how to meet him halfway." Captain Quamar walked the halls and saw the difference. "Efficiency has always meant sameness," she said slowly. "But perhaps true efficiency means fit. When every passenger can function without pain, the whole voyage is smoother." Not everyone agreed at first. Dorian Pike, the executive in the fine coat, scoffed loudly. "This ship cannot bend for every unusual traveler. Costs will rise, standards will fall. You cannot change space travel into a nursery." Nico answered without anger. "Humans already bend to the universe. We need suits, we need shields, we need gravity that is not natural. We call it normal because it is for us. Why is it a burden when someone else asks the same?" Pike faltered. The words struck deeper than he wanted to admit. Later, away from the crowd, he confessed something to Bram. My daughter struggles on Mars. The lights and sounds crush her. The doctors tell us she will adapt. But it has been 2 years. She has not. He paused, then said, if this can help, then I will support it. I will fund it. Word of Nico's solution spread beyond the ship. Mira Hask, a xenobiologist, began to document the methods as practical steps. With consent, we will call this the Listening Spaces Protocol, she explained. Not just for draconids, but for every traveler who needs difference respected. Ina Vale, the administrator bound for Triton's outpost Aurora, promised to carry the new protocol into colonial law. We must build stations that begin with accommodation, not patch it later, she said. And so, the Wayfarer Dawn was no longer just a ship carrying passengers. It became a moving classroom, a living experiment in how to travel together across the stars. Meredith walked the decks with calm pride. His field sense located tiny fractures in the hull that scanners missed. He pointed them out to Jules, who marked them for repair. See? Meredith rumbled. My difference is strength. Nico smiled. Every difference can be strength if someone listened. Over the following days, the ship transformed in small but powerful ways. Mist curled in one wing for the SETI. Heat glowed in another for Ember Weavers. Corridors held softer light. Spaces that once forced silence now held voices of thanks. The passengers who had once shouted complaints in the gallery now looked at Nico with a new kind of respect. They had come aboard expecting to travel in comfort built only for them. Instead, they were learning what it meant to share a journey with others whose needs were different but no less real. As the Wayfarer Dawn neared the orbit of Europa, Captain Kamar gathered everyone in the observation deck. Through the wide windows, Jupiter's storms rolled in endless motion. Today, she said, we have seen that survival in space does not come from uniformity. It comes from cooperation. The boy has reminded us that listening is the first tool of every voyager. Nico stood quietly beside Meredith and Bram. He did not look for praise. He simply kept his eyes on the stars, knowing the voyage was not finished yet. The ship's intercom announced their approach to Outpost Aurora on Triton. 14 hours remained until arrival. 14 hours to continue building a new kind of journey, one where no passenger was asked to suffer in silence, and where every difference was seen not as weakness, but as another way to survive the universe. Wayfarer Dawn glided toward Neptune Colony, its engines humming with a steady rhythm. For the first time since departure, the ship felt calm. No shrill cries echoed through the cargo deck. No shouts of anger rolled from the passenger galleries. Instead, there was something new in the air: understanding. Nico walked the halls beside his uncle Bram, who carried the scent of oil and steel wherever he went. They were joined by Meredith, the draconid whose cries had once shaken the ship to its bones. Now Meredith's scales glowed softly, his eyes clear, his steps steady. The boy had given him balance. But more than that, the boy had given everyone a new way of seeing. Passengers, who had once whispered about delay, now approached with questions. The Shimmerfolk asked if the softened lights would remain after landing. The Ember Weavers offered thanks with warm pulses of heat in their palms. Even the SETI, usually silent, brushed their damp fingers across Nico's sleeve in gratitude. I didn't do much, Nico said whenever someone thanked him. I just noticed what no one else did. But to the others, that noticing was everything. On the observation deck, Captain Lydia Kamar stood with arms behind her back. She had spent her career enforcing regulations, demanding discipline, and trusting procedure above all else. Yet here she was, watching a boy in a patched jumpsuit teach her ship how to bend. Sometimes rules hold, she murmured to herself. But sometimes rules must bow. Dorian Pike, the executive who had once mocked Meredith, approached Nico quietly. His proud posture was gone, replaced by something heavier. "My daughter," he said in a low voice, "struggles like your friend. Sounds overwhelm her. Lights hurt her eyes. The doctors call it a condition. They say she will adapt, but she does not." Nico looked at him, calm and steady. "She is not broken. She is different. The world must adapt for her, not the other way around." Pike nodded slowly. "Then I will help build that world. I sit on the colonial board. I can see that new stations are designed with listening spaces from the beginning." Bram raised an eyebrow. "Words are easy. Action is harder." Pike met his gaze. "Then watch me act." As the ship crossed the edge of the asteroid belt, small tremors shook the hull. Meredith tensed, his tail curling close. Old habits of fear tugged at him. But this time, Nico was ready. "Ride the wave," he whispered. "Don't fight it. You were made for change." Bram adjusted the gravity fields, syncing them to the natural fluctuations. Meredith swayed with the rhythm like a dancer, his wings adjusting in perfect harmony. The passengers watched in awe. The dragon who once screamed in agony now moved with grace, teaching them that adaptation could be beauty. News of the boys' solutions traveled fast. Mira Hask, the xenobiologist, began drafting papers on multi-species design. Administrator Ina Vale promised new policies. Even Jules Marlowe, who had spent years as Meredith's caretaker, felt his perspective crack open. "I thought I was protecting him," Jules admitted. "But I was only trying to make him human. You reminded me he never needed to be human. He needed space to be himself." Meredith rumbled deeply. The translator caught his words. Different makes strong. The final hours of the voyage unfolded like no journey before. Shimmerfolk taught children how their skin turned light into living art. Ember weavers showed others how to sense heat as patterns. SETI shared songs shaped by water, filling the hallways with liquid harmony. The ship became not just a vessel, but a place where difference was not hidden. It was celebrated. As Neptune Colony came into view, domes glittering against the frozen surface, Captain Kamar called all passengers to the observation deck. Her voice filled the hall, steady but touched with emotion. "We began this journey in chaos. We end it in change. Today we have learned that space is not only for humans. It is for every being brave enough to cross the void. From now on, the Wayfarer Dawn will travel differently. Different does not mean weak. Different makes us stronger." Applause rose, but it was not the polite clapping of obligation. It was full and real, joined by the shimmer of light from Shimmerfolk, the heat pulses of Ember Weavers, and the watery chorus of the SETI. It was the first true multi-species celebration the passengers had ever seen. Nico shifted uncomfortably under the attention. But Meredith spread one wing around him, a gesture of pride and protection. "You changed them," Meredith said softly. "No," Nico replied, his voice steady. I just reminded them to listen. When the ship docked, reporters crowded the ramp, eager for the story of the boy who calmed a dragon. "What makes you so special?" one demanded. Nico shook his head. "Nothing. I just believe everyone deserves to exist comfortably, no matter how they experience the world." Another reporter pressed. "But surely, some species do not belong in space." Before Nico could answer, Merith lifted his head, golden eyes gleaming. The translator spoke his words with perfect clarity. "Humans do not belong in space either. They need suits, oxygen, and shields. Yet they come, because courage is greater than perfection." Silence followed, then slow applause. Even the reporters could not deny the truth. Later, as the passengers dispersed into Neptune Colony, Nico stood with Bran and Merith at the edge. Snowflakes of frozen methane drifted softly against the dome's lights. "Marcus would have loved this," Bram said quietly, speaking of Nico's older brother, who had once dreamed of such changes. Nico nodded. He always said the future would bend if people dared to see differently. Today, it bent a little. Merith lowered his head until his golden eyes met Nico's. "And tomorrow, it bends more." The boy smiled faintly, his voice carrying steady and clear. "Yes, tomorrow it bends more." And with that, the Wayfarer Dawn's journey ended, but the story of a listening boy, a dragon who roared, and a ship that learned to bend had only just begun.